Hi, I'm Caroline Mitchell, Canine Behaviouristic Good Doggy. Do you struggle with your dog's unpredictable behaviour while you're trying to train them? Maybe one time you're out working with a trigger and they're fine. The next day they just bark their head off constantly. They can't be consoled. And another day, maybe they barely even notice something going by. This is a really common complaint that I get from my clients. It's something that's really important to people. They feel that if their dog is not predictable, then how can they train them? Inconsistent and random behaviour can be quite stressful when you're trying to work on a behaviour problem, because how do you know when to train and how do you know what not to train? So why is that? Let's take people as an example. A common trigger for dogs to be reactive would be a tall man. So let's use that as our example. The thing about people is that people look different, their behavior can be different, their attitude can be different, the way they dress can be different. So we get so many variations with just one person. Maybe when you're in the park and you're walking with your dog, you know, one person might actually look at your dog and try to engage with them. Your dog might find that more intimidating than a person that was walking past looking the opposite way. Maybe they have an attitude about them, about the way they're walking, the way that they're looking, the way they hold themselves. And this could affect your dog. Perhaps they're quite soft in the way that they're moving. Your dog might find that easier to cope with than somebody who's walking very, very quickly and kind of striding out. Maybe they're talking quite loudly with somebody that they're with, or, you know, their behavior could be quite aggressive and quite fast moving, or it could be gentle and soft. Even the way that they look and the way that they dress can vary massively from one person to another. So there's so many different variations. Tall man really doesn't tell us very much about what your dog's struggling with in that situation. So one possible reason for unpredictable and inconsistent behavior from your dog is maybe that actually the people that they're coming across in this example are also not terribly consistent in the way that they look, move, dress, etc. Other dogs are the same. So if your dog is triggered by other dogs can look different, different sizes, different colours, different demeanours. Some are running, some are far away, some are walking quite calmly. Some might be barking, some might be looking at you, some might not be, some might be interested in a toy. So there's so many different variations there as well. Added to that, we also have expectations from previous experiences with that trigger. So in this experience of a tall man, maybe this particular trigger could be that they always come over to your dog and always put their hand down in front of them, even though your dog is giving off warning signs that say, please leave me alone. Maybe he's trying to avoid them, get behind you. But in his previous experience, people that look a bit like this trigger will often try and come over to him. So maybe he's more defensive of tall men that look at them rather than tall men that don't look at them. Another factor that is going to affect his behavior that day is his own mood. What mood is he actually in today? What's happened already today, you know? We're also affected by previous events of the day. As the day goes on, more and more stuff happens in our lives, and that affects how we respond to the next thing on the list. You know, maybe your dog got up this morning and the kids were rowing before they went off to school. So that would have been a stressful situation. And maybe he tried to have a nap and the DHL man arrived. So that woke him up from his nap. He had to run to the door, go and see what that was all about. On the way to the park, you know, maybe he's had other experiences that have just added and added and added to his kind of his stress levels, to his mood. Or maybe he's had a really fantastic day. Maybe he's had a really nice long nap. He dreamt of rabbits for hours. He had a lovely breakfast. The house was peaceful and calm, and off he went for his walk. And that day he was brilliant. So that on that day he wouldn't have responded maybe to things around him, triggers, people looking at him, that kind of stuff. But if he's had a bad day, his mood will be affected. He'll be grumpy, he'll be tired because his nap got broken, and that's going to make him more reactive. So there's another reason why behaviour can sometimes feel very inconsistent. his needs and goals on the day might be changing. So maybe one day he goes out and what his goal is that day, what he's really thinking about is catching up with his buddies. He wants to play with his friends. So when he comes to the park, he's sniffing about trying to find out if anybody's in the park that he knows and recognizes. He's looking for his friends, and people might just walk past him while he's busy trying to fulfill that need. Goals and needs can often outweigh other things. If he's hungry, you know, he might be more interested in following a treat that day than on another day where he's had his breakfast before he left. He's not so hungry, so that need is now less important than the trigger that's moving around near his space. Perhaps in the park, you know, he's thinking about going for a pee, you know, perhaps he's got a headache, perhaps he's sore, he could be tired, you know, the weather might be different. So all of these things will just change his needs and goals on the day. And that will make him more or less reactive to triggers. He'll notice them or not notice them depending on where his needs are. But if he's generally pretty calm, has nothing outstanding in his life, he doesn't have any needs he needs to fulfill, and he's looking around the park, you'll maybe find that that's the day that he would react more consistently to stuff that's going on in his environment. And the last thing that's going to really affect him is what emotion is he feeling at the time. Emotions are really important, because if he's in a very happy mood, then it's going to be harder to trigger him. But if he's in a grumpy mood, or if he's anxious, or all of those things in general, that's going to change the way he reacts. So taking him out in a nice, calm, happy emotion will be better. If he's overexcited, he will generally probably be more reactive than if he's calm. The emotions run on a scale, so all emotions start with calm, and as they escalate, the behavior gets bigger, and at some point then you'll breach threshold. If you're not sure about threshold, check out my video on what threshold is and how to solve that. That will talk to you a little bit more about how to manage emotions and keep them under threshold, because under threshold, they're very much aware of their environment. They will be able to respond to commands, things like that. Once they go over threshold, their brain is switched off and they're more focused on what's happening around them, and they will be more reactive. And the reactions will be bigger as well. The further along you go that scale, the bigger the reactions will be, until eventually, if you reach the very, very top of the scale, any emotion can become aggressive. So if a dog becomes far too excitable, they'll go through steps of being quite calm. Then they will start maybe moving quite quickly. Their body reactions will become faster. They'll start jumping up. They'll start barking. Going on from there, they might actually start grabbing at your clothes and mouthing at your stuff. And that will just escalate and escalate and escalate until eventually there's nowhere left to go, and that will come out as aggression. So that emotion scale is quite important. So wherever your dog is on that scale, whenever they encounter a trigger, will also affect how they react to it. So if they're very low on the scale, they might look at a trigger and try to just move out of its way. But if they're very high on the scale, then they might go to full-on barking and lunging and aggression. So managing where they are on that scale, keeping them under threshold, is also really important. So we can see that there's lots and lots of different things that will affect your dog's behavior and affect the way they react to a trigger. So it's not quite so simple as just saying that your dog either did react or didn't react. It's not about consistency. It's not about predictability. So we can see that there's more to the way they make a decision about how they're going to react to a behavior than just the profile of the trigger that's coming towards them, whether it is a tall man or whether it is a black dog. There's much, much more to it than that. So we can see in this pie chart that all of those things are giving an equal amount of weight whenever you're talking about how a dog makes this decision. But what if he's very, very moody that day? You can see now that that part of the pie chart has now become much more important. This will make him much more reactive, perhaps because he's in a bad mood. And we've always talked about how his goals and needs can be more important. So what happens if he needs a pee or he's hungry? Then that becomes a bigger part of the decision-making process. So what this chart shows us is that all of these things are not necessarily equal when it comes to making a decision about how to respond to a trigger. And this is why we end up with such inconsistent behavior. So hopefully that little pie chart sums up what we've just said quite nicely and illustrates exactly really the predicament that your dog is in. So the big question is, how do we solve this? We've talked about the emotional scale earlier on in this video. What this tells us, they'll be somewhere on this emotional scale, whether they're at the very calmest end or whether they're at the top end and they're showing aggression. All of the other factors around them will push them somewhere along this scale. Your dog is going to see his trigger if it's a man walking, tall man, or if it's a black dog, or a small child, whatever their trigger is, they're going to see it. And as soon as they become aware of it, that's going to change their emotion. So they're at the very, very start of this emotional journey. So they have been triggered. The difference is how much have they been triggered. So keeping them at the bottom end of the scale is really important. But what else is important is that because they have been triggered to feel an emotion, we can still react and we can still respond. So actually, the consistency can come from us. If we feel like our dog isn't behaving consistently because actually their reaction is different depending on where they are on this emotional scale and all those other things that have affected them in their day, we can still be consistent. So what we should do is we should generalize our triggers. So if you think that your dog is reactive to tall men, then let's generalize that further. Let's talk about all men, because actually it's very likely that your dog is triggered by all men that come near them. It's just that their reaction is so mild that you didn't notice it. They might well have just looked at that person and got a little bit anxious. Maybe they moved backwards and you didn't notice that. The behavior you're focusing on is that big, loud, lunging, barking kind of behavior. That's what we think about when we talk about somebody being triggered, a dog being triggered by something in their environment. But their reaction could just be just to look at it a bit harder, just to move to the side. So they're on that scale of emotion. So we should generalize triggers. If your dog is triggered by dogs, then you need to generalize to all dogs. Anything that's dog-like. Your dog might be worried or might appear to be worried about male black dogs or small neutered females or whatever it is that you think that your dog is really focusing on, but actually they're probably focusing on all of that, just not in a big way. So you generalize whatever it is that your dog is triggered by, make it bigger, expand your generalizations so that it includes everything that's like it. So not just tall men, maybe tall women, maybe all people in work clothes, that kind of stuff, So we're going to generalize this as big as we can, and then you can be consistent and respond to every single situation that you encounter that fits this new generalization. So whatever it is that you've been trying to do with your dog, if you're trying to get them to look at you or sit or take a treat, then as soon as that trigger comes into your space, whatever it is, even if it's not your dog's main focus, then you respond and you get them to do whatever it is that you want them to do. And it'll be really easy for the ones that they don't usually respond to in that big way, because they haven't crossed the threshold then. It's only really when dogs go above the threshold that we really pay attention and start to worry about it and start to think we should do something about this. But because they've not gone above that, they're very, very low in that emotional scale, this will be really easy for them. But what it does is it makes you very consistent, because your dog is experiencing every trigger somehow on that emotional scale, as we just discussed. But what this means is that if you don't respond every time your dog starts to become anxious about something, even if it's only just 0.5% anxious, then actually you look really inconsistent to your dog. And you might work really, really hard on the stuff that he's really bothered by and then miss out a whole bunch of stuff that's in between. So now your dog can get confused and go, well, I thought I knew what I had to do, but actually then these other things came along and we didn't do it for them. Why are we just doing it for those? Maybe this is, not what I think it is. So your dog will get really confused and he will actually start to find you inconsistent. So you know how frustrating it is when you can't predict your dog's behavior. Your dog is now going to start to feel the same because he can't predict your behavior either. He's going, but these people are here and they're scaring me. But we ignored these ones and didn't ignore these ones. So this is where the consistency will come from. So it starts with you. You start to generalize the trigger, work on every single version and variety and anything that's like it. And as you go through this process, you will suddenly appear very, very consistent, and your dog will then start to become consistent himself. All of the things that push him high up that scale of emotions will stop pushing him down. The more consistent you are, the more the stuff that we talked about there in that pie chart, all of those other things that will affect his behavior that day and affect his response, those things become less and less important. They matter less. So whenever you're working with him, you'll find that that will then start to get consistent. If you can add a consistent routine into his life, so he has his naps and his food and all the things that he needs, all of these wants and needs, all at predictable times, you know that his general mood over the day will be much more predictable too, and more consistent, and this will affect his reaction to triggers too. But it all starts with you. You be consistent, you generalize the trigger, and everything else just falls into place after it. Check out that video on threshold, because that will give you some clues as well about how to work with them and keep them under threshold. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care for now. Bye bye.